as a way to tackle the country's drugs death crisis. And certainly there is a drugs death crisis in Scotland. There are many parts of Scotland where it's a serious issue in many parts of the UK as well. The pilot scheme will be based at a health centre in the East End of Glasgow, one of the worst parts for drug consumption. It will see users take their own drugs under the supervision of trained health professions. Now, is this a good idea or not? Andy Cowan is a drugs awareness campaigner with Anyone's Child. Andy, you're very welcome to the programme. Hello.
Hi.
Do you think this is a good idea?
Yes, I would say I would have to support it, and I think that really comes from, to a huge extent, my own experience. I do speak for Anyone's Child who are looking for changes in drug laws, but that really is rooted in the fact that I lost my own son in 2016 to a drug overdose, and he was just a very healthy, charismatic, vivacious young man of 29, my middle son. And he died of a drug overdose, and clearly that has had a huge impact on the way that I look at this whole issue.
I'm very sorry to hear that, Andy. I'm sorry to hear that you had that experience.
Yeah, thank you. But that clearly has affected my judgment on the issue, partly because since then I've done an awful lot of educating myself around the issues. And I guess I would have been like many people in the British public who would just feel quite icky about the whole subject and feeling that it's not something that we should be supporting. But it's one of those things that I think the more you learn about and the bigger you realise how much of a crisis this is in our society, it does have the impact of changing your view somewhat.
So maybe you would explain this to us, Andy. So I'm coming at this from a position where I'm asking the questions, doesn't this... I'll throw a few questions at you and then just let you talk without interrupting you. So isn't this encouraging people to take drugs? Isn't this legitimising taking drugs when it's actually illegal? And we should be trying to both do it from a criminal justice perspective of arresting people who are in possession and supply drugs, but also trying to help them off drugs as well. Will this actually help people off drugs, or will it just say, look, you're taking drugs, therefore you can keep taking them? I kind of get the argument that there should be, you know, people sharing needles is never a good thing. People doing so in an unhealthy way is not a good thing. And maybe people will always take drugs anyway. And I mean, there was a sort of slight, is this inevitable? Shouldn't we be giving it up? I mean, those are kind of all the thoughts that are going round my head. How would you sort of persuade me with all of that in mind, Andy?
So I think, I mean, the context of this, I think we have to remember, is that we have had a very one-dimensional approach to this issue for as long as I've been alive. I'm 62. And really the way that in the main we've dealt with this as a society, all of the modern Western countries had been the same for a very, very long time. And that was really two things. That was prohibition, and the reason for prohibition, illegality of the drugs themselves, was to stop the supply and just make sure that they weren't available. And secondly was criminalisation, and that was to punish users and people that were selling drugs and distributing drugs and so on. So we had this prohibition and criminalisation approach, and that has been our approach for many, many years. You remember Richard Nixon's sort of war on drugs proclamation in the early 70s. The problem with that is that it hasn't worked on both of these counts. So in terms of prohibition, and as I came to realise at my great cost when I lost my son, drugs are absolutely ubiquitous. Illegal drugs, there's a huge epidemic of illegal drugs in terms of supply in the UK. Any young person, any student, anybody, anywhere in the country can get their hands on illegal recreational drugs at any time. They're circulating. There are literally huge supplies. That's why some of the richest people in the world are heading up billionaire criminal cartels around the world. So it has done nothing at all to halt supply. Prohibition has failed dramatically there. And then secondly, in terms of criminalisation, that has not worked either, because criminalisation is supposed to disincentivize and so on. But the problem is that more and more people are taking recreational drugs. And probably your viewers and listeners won't be aware of this because I wasn't, but there are literally millions of people, even in the UK, who take these drugs. Now, the addicts and people who have real problems with these drugs really are the tip of the iceberg. There's a huge amount of people in all parts of society who take recreational drugs, and they take them quite routinely, and they take them at parties, and they take them at festivals, and so on and so on and so on. So that really, on both of these counts, on supply and on disincentivization, it hasn't worked. Now, what has been the result of all of this? Well, over the past few years, the numbers of deaths from drug taking have just dramatically increased. And so when you say, well, let's do something to stop the supply, well, clearly that's not worked. Let's do something to disincentivize. That's not worked. And what I'm arguing for is a sort of new paradigm where we see this in a slightly different way. And we say, well, okay, it's clear over 60 years plus that this hasn't worked. What can we do if we really thought about this and we stopped simply stigmatizing drug taking? For example, I didn't know that my son was an occasional user of recreational drugs. He wasn't a drug addict. He wouldn't have needed the safe consumption room, but he was poisoned because he took what he thought was ecstasy. It turned out that it was laced probably with fentanyl, which is a synthetic opioid, and he died. But in England and Wales in 2021, 5,000 people died from similar drug poisoning. This is an absolute epidemic of death.
So to sort of boil your argument down, and we just have a couple of minutes left, but it's really the thought that this is people are going to take drugs anyway. Let's help them do so in a safe way. Let's make sure they don't kill themselves in the process, and maybe that can actually help people reduce it in some way, or at least take them in a safe way.
Well, yes, and can I just say this is not a new idea. I mean, there are now something like 120 safe consumption rooms across 12 countries, not just in Europe, but also Australia.
But it's the first in the
Canada.
UK.
It's the first in the UK, but actually it's not the only initiative in the UK, Peter. There's also, we've had a diversion scheme run by the police where they don't prosecute, they simply tell people to go for counselling. We've had The Loop, which is a group that goes to festivals and helps young people to test the illegal drugs that they're going to take to make sure they're not going to kill them before they take them. So we've had a lot of initiatives where compassion and tolerance are key here, and we just want people not to die.
Yeah.
And I would see this pilot in Scotland as really just an extension of that.
Okay, Andy Cowan, drugs awareness campaigner, Anyone's Child. Thank you so much, and thanks for talking about your son as well. I'm sure that's not an easy thing to do, so I appreciate that. Andy, Nicholas has been in touch. He says, surely the drug users will use the facility to take any freebies they can and sell it on the streets to get money for more drugs. The fact police allow this should make the state investigate the police. Well, Nicholas, they won't be supplied with drugs. They would have to buy their own drugs, but I can see where you're coming from. Nicholas also said providing a room for banned drugs and getting funding for it not only makes the SNP state dealer, it also encourages the evil trade that makes suppliers rich off a world of misery and makes the SNP guilty of encouraging illegal criminal behaviour, according to Nicholas. Well, we heard the arguments from Andy there, but certainly we'll hear any arguments on this. I remain I think I'm more convinced than I was, but I still have some more questions. Maybe we should talk about it or return to it on a separate occasion. One thing we'll definitely be talking about, as we often do on this programme, is Ukraine. Mary Dejevsky is